Welcome to Ken's Korner Podcast, Season 4.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here on Ken's Corner, and today I'm here with sports journalist, Mr. Jim Lang. How are you today, Jim?
I'm good, Ken. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm much better now that you're here. We're going to walk you back through your early years. Let's talk about how Jim Lang decided he wanted to be not only a journalist, but a sports journalist at that.
Well, when I graduated from Humber College in '87, Kevin, there was no sports radio or sports television really in Canada. TSN had just started. And so I was working in different music radio stations and bounced around. And then in '95, I got the chance to work at the Fan. So that would have been about February '95. And that's where my sort of sports journalism career started. I had always had an interest in sports, obviously, and I had done some brief stories around sports, but it was a doing some reporting because especially midday, some of our reporters, especially covering the Leafs, were traveling and they'd say they need someone to go to Maple Leaf Gardens and talk to Pat Burns or Doug Gilmour or the visiting players. Like, I'll go. And I would just hop in the subway, go to old Maple Leaf Gardens. And when I started, Ken, there were still a lot of old school newspaper writers, and newspapers were huge in '95 still. And they were veterans from the late '50s and early '60s who would cover the Leafs Stanley Cup run in the '60s, and they were getting towards their end of their career. And at that time, when you were in a scrum with Pat Burns, the veteran newspaper reporters, they all got the first questions. Then it was the junior paper reporters, then maybe Hockey Night in Canada, and being a radio reporter, you waited till they were done. You looked in the scrum, and then they gave you the nod, and then you knew you could ask your question. There was a real etiquette and a real pecking order. You didn't just go in there and start asking questions and interrupt the Hall of Fame newspaper writers and columnists who were there. You just never did that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Actually, I've actually done a little bit of media days down with the Argos game. So it actually brings me back to that going into the locker room. Today, they just allowed me kind of to float around and ask a few questions of the Argo players. I actually want to speak to you on that a little bit. I know that you worked, you were the voice of the Toronto Argos. And so you must have some sort of a knowledge on this team this year. Do you think that this game coming up this weekend in Montreal is set as a revenge game? And are the Argos poised to do what Montreal did to us just a year ago?
Well, I'm sure revenge is on their mind, Ken. Montreal is very, very good. And that Molson Stadium is a tough barn to play in. And it's going to be the ultimate test for the Argos and Coach Dinwiddie and Kelly, the quarterback, and like everyone. They can't make mental mistakes. They can't turn the ball over because Montreal's too good, and at home it's too much of a home field advantage. And the Alouettes have built a heck of a team, well coached, deep, and then with that home field advantage, I mean, the Argos are certainly capable of winning the game, Ken, but it's one of those games where, offside penalties, false starts, fumbles, all that kind of stuff will add up and they'll just bite them in the butt in the end. And they can't have it. It's almost have to play mistake-free football. Don't turn the ball over. Make the most of your opportunities as much as possible. Get touchdowns instead of field goals and hope for the best because it's going to be a very, very tough challenge. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I'm going to agree with my friend Adam Rita. Argos are going to the Grey Cup this year.
Well, Adam would know. He's forgotten more about football than most people will ever know. That's for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Such an amazing man. I want to talk a little bit about some of the shows that you've actually had. Sportsnet Connect with Ivanka. That really sparked my interest. Can we talk a little bit about this show?
Well, yeah, what happened was I was doing in 2001, I was working on Sportsnet Radio, which was syndicated radio from the Sportsnet studios. And I had done a little bit of TV for CHTV for their OUA football and hockey coverage. And at the time, Ken, the morning show at Sportsnet was done live. So you had to be there at 4 a.m. and they were on the air at 6. And the host was going on a 3-week vacation with his family. And all the evening anchors, Darren Millard and Mike Toth and Jamie Campbell and Peter Labardius, they had filled in once in a while. They told management, I'm not doing that for 3 weeks, because their whole body, if you can imagine, it was like get to work at 6. Hockey, baseball starts at 7. You're on there at 11. You're out of there at 2. To get there at 4, it was too much. And so they gave me a screen test, and then I filled in for 3 weeks because I've been doing this the morning, get up at stupid o'clock and go to work when it's dark for most of my life. So that's what I do. And then so I had worked at different shows before with Ivanka. I worked with RJ Broadhead. I had worked with Toth, with Millard. I'd done reporting, and then eventually working with Ivanka and Connected. Yeah.
That's a great story. I want to talk about your other show. I think it's more recent, the Jim Lane show with Martha and Neil.
Yeah, so Martha was there at the beginning, and then she moved on to other things. And so I've been at 105.9 The Region doing the Jim Lang shows for, it'll be 11 years in December, and servicing York Region, Witchert, Stouffville, all the communities in York Region. And unfortunately, I mean, York Region is bigger in population than Edmonton or Ottawa and Calgary, and is underserved by media. And most Toronto newspapers and TV stations and radio stations, they don't really care about what's going on in the Newmarket or Corridor or East Gwillimbury or Witchert, Stouffville or something like that, where we do that and we cover that and report on it. And Stouffville High and the Roar Tigers are playing the Stouffville Spirit or things like that. We'll talk about that. So yeah, it's great to get to know the people in the community, businesses, people like you, Ken, and yeah. So it's great because I've lived in the Newmarket for 20 years, so it's like living and working where my area, and so that's great.
Yeah, I have to agree with you fully. I grew up in the Witchert Stouffville area. I'm in here right now. I cover the Stouffville Spirit, so
Nice.
Yeah, it's very, very fun to do. And I've actually spoke to some of your boys on the Aurora Tigers when they've been to our arena. So they seem like a great young man as well. I appreciate you and your station.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's talk about your books, and most recently, your book that's right behind you. Let's speak about that book right there. You just released it.
Yeah, Everyday Hockey Heroes Volume 3, and I'm very proud of it, Ken. It's a collection of stories about people making a difference in the game, including Angela James, the Hockey Hall of Famer, who's lived in Richmond Hill for a long time. Graham McWaters from Richmond Hill, who's an individual, and what he's done is made it his mission in life is he gathers new or slightly used hockey equipment that's unwanted and gives it to Indigenous communities across the country. So young kids in Indigenous communities can play hockey, and they'll ship a truckload of sticks or skates or equipment, and they've had different people step up and donate it. Kelly Surbu, who's a judge in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and he's the captain of the Canadian blind hockey team. And he talks about, losing his vision in his late teens, becoming a blind hockey player and becoming a judge. And there's a number of different people. And Toby and Bernie and Mariko Boulay and the Boulay family, their son Logan was on the Humboldt Broncos bus crash. And afterwards, Logan had donated a bunch of organs after he had passed away. And so they try to carry on the memory of his name with something called the Green Shirt Effect. And it's to sign up as many Canadians as possible to sign their organ donation card, because we forget that millions of Canadians have their license and they forget to sign their organ card. And it's to remind people. And since they started this, Ken, they have signed up over 150,000 new organ donors to remind them, hey, don't forget, just click off the link to say you're going to be an organ donor if, God forbid, anything happens, and potentially could save a lot of lives.
Yeah, that's amazing. Amazing story. True hockey heroes, that's for sure. And the indigenous part, I appreciate that as well. I am from the Walk 16 nation, Ojibwe myself, up in Perry
Oh,
Islands. So I appreciate what you're saying there. That's amazing, amazing story. Um, can we talk about some of your other books, your memoirs? You have quite a few of them there. Can you run us through them real quick?
right. But about 11 years ago, 10 years ago now, Ken, I had an opportunity to work with Tie Domi on his memoir called Shift Work, and it was a great experience. And while working on it, um, got to speak with or meet with Mark Messier and Matt Sundin and a lot of different people, getting to know Ty and working with his memoir. And then I was fortunate that was followed by working with Wendel Clark and his work with Bryan Berard, who a lot of people may not remember. He got
Yeah.
hit in the eye with Marion Host's stick and lost the vision in his one eye. He was out of hockey, then came back and played 6 more years in the NHL, basically as a one-eyed hockey player. And Max Domi, and Max, Ty's son, for people who don't know it, Ken, was diagnosed as a juvenile diabetic with type 1 diabetes when he was like 12 years old. So all through his AAA hockey, midget hockey, Team Canada, through the juniors and the NHL, he tests his blood, gives himself insulin, and deals with type 1 diabetes while playing in the NHL. And he's in his own way, he's inspired a lot of kids who are dealing with diabetes as a disease. That, hey, like, if you take care of it and you listen to your doctors and you're on top of it, you could do anything like me and play in the NHL.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, my brother owns a copy of the Tie Domi one. Maybe one day you can autograph it for me.
Sure. Okay.
That'd
Yeah.
be amazing.
Yeah. Dude, working with Ty, Ken, you talk to different people and different players and different coaches who work with him, and you realize, like, he has a record that will never be broken. And when he retired, he had 333 fighting majors that were listed in the NHL record book. And players don't fight in the NHL like they did in the 80s and 90s when he was in his heyday, Ken. You know this. So I don't think we're ever going to see another player who play as long as he did and fight as long as he did as Ty Domi did. And he wasn't a big guy physically, but I talking to Adam Graves and a lot of his buddies who played with him, both in the Rangers and the Leafs, they all talk about how strong he was, and he would grab a hold of people in a fight with his hand. He had really, really strong grip, and he was, big, strong legs, and he was short, and he would pull the other fighter towards him and spin. And as they would start to lose their balance, he'd come in and punch them. And he had a real science to it, how he would do it, because he's like, they got bigger reach than I am. They're taller than me. They're bigger than me. So I have to figure out how to do this. And he figured it out for a long time in the NHL.
Yeah, he certainly did, as we all can attest to. Leaf fan or any hockey fan for that matter. Since we're talking about hockey, just on the way out the door, can you give us your analysts on this year's Toronto Maple Leafs?
I'm a big Craig Berube fan. I think it was a good hire. I think there's a feeling out between Craig Berube and the new coaching staff and the players, and they're learning each other as they go. But we've seen what happened with the Bruins the other night. We know what they're capable of. If they get some consistent goaltending, they have tons of offensive talent. I like the addition of Oliver Ekman-Larsson on the blue line. Signing McCabe to that long-term contract was smart. I think there's some pieces in place that they could do something special, Ken. I'm curious to see what they do at the deadline, because I think they probably will need to add some depth to make sure they're ready for the playoffs. But the one thing I like about Craig Berube is, he's a real, like, hey, he'll say, you're good, I like you, you're my player, but that wasn't good enough, you need to be better. And he's not shy about saying that. And you hear interviews with Tom Brady and Sidney Crosby and Steph Curry and all these great athletes, and they say they like when a coach says, well, you're great, but you weren't great there, you need to be better. And they like to be coached, and they want to be their very best. And so I think Craig Berube, Ken, is the kind of guy who's going to try to squeeze the very best out of all the players, because they are so much talent on the Leafs team every night. And I'm okay with that. I'm excited as they learn each other and get to know each other, how they're going to come to be. Because you see some glimpses, Ken. You're like, I think this team could be very special this year.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. And I listened to what Jeff Merrick said in his new job at Leaf Nation, and he said, Stellaires, and more Stellaires. So, do you still think Joseph Woll is going to end up being our starting goalie by the end of the year?
I honestly, I think it's a health issue, because he has a lot of these little nagging injuries from time to time. And if he's healthy and feeling it, I think Craig Berube is going to have that good problem to have as a coach, and he can lean on who's the hottest goalie at the time, knowing that whoever is backing up is good as well. Mm-hmm. I just think it's how healthy he is and how well he's playing come playoff time. I don't know for sure, but I imagine Craig is thinking that Stolarz has proven that he can play, and you got Wall who can play. Whoever is healthiest and playing the best come the playoffs, they'll give him the bulk of the starts and say, we're going to run with you.
Yeah, you're right. I agree with you. Thank you so much for your time today, Jim. My name's Ken. We're here on Ken's Corner with sports analyst today, sports journalist, Jim Lang. Thank you so much for your time today.
Ken, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.